Hi, I'm Bryan Schrader, and you're listening to Outstanding in Your Field, powered by Pioneer Agronomy. I'm here with my co-hosts, agronomist Carl Joern and Crystal Williams.
Think of us as IT for your crops. If we know how to fix your issues, we'll tell you. And if not, we've probably got a workaround.
And if we don't, we'll find one, because Mother Nature isn't like an on-off switch.
We have the privilege of having Geoff Graham with us today. Geoff is the Vice President of Seed Product Development for Pioneer. And in conjunction with the 100th anniversary of Pioneer, we wanted to get Geoff on, talk a little bit about the history of the R&D and the product development group within Pioneer, so that we can take you back a little bit and talk about some key moments through the history of Pioneer, talk about some of the key individuals involved in research and development over the history, and just try to pull the curtain back for those of you listening to get a better insight into what Pioneer's made of and why we have been able to achieve what we have. And so with that, Geoff, thank you very much for taking the time to join us on the podcast today.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to come talk about things that I love to share.
Sure. Well, Geoff, I've been with the organization a little time, and so I know that over the course of your career, you've had several different roles within the R&D organization, but currently serve as the Vice President for Seed Product Development. Can you just briefly, for our listeners, kind of walk us through your experience, your time with Pioneer, and all of the roles that you have held within the organization, just for some background?
Yeah. I started like 25 years ago, and now I find it interesting that I'm like the historian of the organization, right? So I must be getting a little long in the tooth. But when I started off, I came in and it was about how to incorporate new technologies into breeding programs. And so I started there. I moved to Johnston, Iowa, and I took over a breeding program shortly after that. And the whole time I was breeding again, it was, how do we get better? How do we continue to push technologies, but also seedsmanship into our breeding programs? And so somewhere around 2006, 2008, I started just taking on bigger responsibilities within the organization. One was as a technology leader. Then I started leading North America's product development activities. Then, you kind of do a little bit more every year. And then I started assuming on global responsibilities. And it was probably about 8 to 10 years ago, I started leading the whole breeding organization at Pioneer and Corteva, going through the different mergers and acquisitions and journeys that we've been on. But yeah, always with the mindset on breeding.
So Geoff, when you started in that technology role, what would have been some of the technologies that you were looking at today that has changed so fast in terms of the breeding organization? What would have been the cutting edge technology at the time when you started with the organization that they were looking for you to start to incorporate into the R&D process?
One of the fundamental things that we did back in those early days, we're just trying to learn how to use genetic information like DNA markers and genomic sequences to help with our product development. And let me put this into context, because it's so, it changes so quickly. But I think back in the day when I started, we might have had like 2 million, 3 million data points for the entire breeding organization to use on an annual basis, right? There was a little bit used for other purposes. And today, just the lab downstairs here in Johnston would probably do that in the afternoon, right? And you just start thinking about like the scale in which it's actually growing at to go through it. It's just been shocking. And I think what's really happened over this time, and you can look at it in a bunch of different ways, but we've actually had to create, how do we get data? How do we get good data? And that can be genetic data, field data, grower data, that type of stuff. How do we analyze all that data, and how do we put our computational systems in place? And then probably the most important part is, how do we make better decisions? And really shaping the pipeline so that you have the right information to make the right decisions at the right time have been hugely important for us. And I kind of really think we started getting, in R&D, I would say this, we started getting comfortable somewhere around 2012, 2013, that we had the pipeline in place, and we just needed to turn the crank a couple of generations to go through. And so I think we're living a bit about some of those decisions on in those the decisions made on in those early days about if you can create the pipeline the right way, and then you run the pipeline and you run it full, you can get a lot of great outcomes, a lot of great products. And I love where we are today. I think it's phenomenal.
Yeah, well, I think about timeline. I think about some of the hybrids that Crystal, Carl, and I have the opportunity to promote and sell to our customers. And if you think about that 2012 timeline, and then you think about the 5 to 7 years of development, some of our key products would have came out of some of those decisions, and we know what they do in the field and what they're providing to us agronomically. And so I think, to your point, we are living those cranks or two that you made in the process.
Yeah, one of the things that I love today is like, so I still go out. I just schedule a week where I don't have any meetings, and I go out by myself, and I just walk our 3s or 4s or 5s, and I just go out by myself because, if you're by yourself, you can walk a lot of plots in a hurry still, right, to go through. And I love what I see in our pipeline. I love that I can look at the R3 pipeline. I can see them. And then when the data comes in the fall, I know what we have in our pipeline is better than what we're selling today. And, that's a great, it's a great feeling that, a little bit of the trend that we've established over the last couple of years, I think is going to continue for a while to come. I think we're going to sit in a pretty outstanding position for, let's keep running this thing. I'm not going to put a time frame on it, but we're going to be in a good position. I love where we are.
Bryan, one thing I heard Geoff say about the research and development program and the decisions they were making, 15 years ago or so, was incorporating seedsmanship, growers, their data, on-farm performance, and how that's led to just a more stable and consistent lineup for us to be able to use with folks. Geoff, do you mind telling people a little bit more about what seedsmanship means to you and how it's incorporated in decision making?
Yeah, look, I think at the end, maybe I'll give a little bit more background. Before I joined Pioneer, I worked for a very small seed company. And, you were basically, I was the corn breeder. I was a representative to the business team. I sat on production teams. Any grower complaint, I had to go out and do all those grower complaints. And the thing that you learn about small seed companies, you learn the connectivity between all of those. It's not just enough to have something in R&D. It's not just good enough to be able to produce it. It's not just good enough to have those relationships with the growers. You have to create that pipeline up to make sure that those things just come through continuously. And I think when I talk about the pipeline, it's that component. So take it when I started with Pioneer, this is early days, 2002, 2003. The connectivity that maybe some folks in R&D had wasn't the greatest. That difference between the breeding group and the product knowledge group, and there was a whole bunch of separations within R&D that I think prevented the communication out to the grower. So one of the things that we did around 2006, 7, 8, I can't remember exactly well, said, no, the breeder has to go from the very beginning all the way through the entire pipeline. There's no handoffs. You have to know the entire process to go through, because I think when you start having that conversation, it helps us understand what a true product looks like, what good looks like. And so sometimes things might look good in an R&D plot, but if they actually don't get out to a farmer's field and perform out there, it's a waste of money to go through. And then we need to work with our GSO colleagues, of course, our production colleagues, just to make sure that they can produce it, because nothing is worse than having a great hybrid that you can't produce, right? So you get out there, you get folks excited about a great hybrid and say, oh, shoot, we don't have supply of this thing anymore, right? So these are the types of things that I think are seedsmanship. And let me tell you one simple thing that we did, and it's probably started in 2009, 10-ish, but just the whole development impact and the conversations that I think R&D and commercial teams started having once we put that system into place. About all of a sudden you had offices out in the field, and you were looking at, and R&D was learning so much because we'd work with our product agronomists, our agronomy team, say, hey, look, people don't like that about this. And you say, well, help me understand why that is. And you started just learning what the problem was more and more and more. And then really a lot about breeding is just shaping where you want to take all that germplasm, that pipeline, how you want to shape it towards what you have out there as a customer. So it was simple things about like that were just about connecting the organization in such a way that we're having better and deeper conversations. And I think the benefit for R&D is that we learned the problem better. I think the benefit for the organization is that we learned how to connect what was upstream to what was needed downstream. And the difference between, the knowledge of what to expect next was much stronger in the organization. So it became much more predictive. It became much more trustworthy. It just became saying, okay, we know you're going to be better. And look, I'll tell you, one of the hardest things for me as I grew, like, I see the Pioneer logo in your background there, Carl, was, as I grew, I always loved numbers. I always loved like my hybrids, especially, right? So like, yeah, I'd see my hybrid and it was like, that number should live forever. But what I've come to appreciate is that I believe that one of the things that we need to do at a pretty frequent cadence is how do we turn a product line over? And that every single year, on average, we're going to get 2 or 3 bushels more out of turning that product line over, right? So if you think about it in 3 years or 5 years, that's 10 bushels that we have. And so living off of really old products is something that we probably shouldn't do. So then take it from me, my perspective, it's like, no, we got to keep it. Like, this is how old I am, but 1151, maybe this is more of a Western product, but one of the first Aquamax products that came out, it came out of my breeding program. And you were like, all right, let's keep this thing around forever. No, man, we got to turn this thing over. We got to get better products out there. And what I think where I want to be, like when you think about like 5 years from now, I want any grower that we grow our material on to have confidence that the next hybrid that we recommend to them is the best thing for their farm. And so that they trust us. They know that what's coming is better than what they grew the year before. And so how to actually turn our product line over at a systematic rate. And I think the word is systematic, right? It's not too fast. It's not too slow. But how do we get that confidence from the grower for saying, hey, look, I think what these guys are going to deliver is going to be better. And then on average, that's going to grow at 2 bushels, 3 bushels more than on an annual basis. And I think that's the part that we really need to figure out how do we do it on our next iteration of product launches.
Well, Geoff, go ahead, Crystal.
Sorry, Ray. Geoff, as someone that's really close to our Princeton location here in Northern Illinois, and I've been to Ivesdale, and I'm sorry, Indiana folks listening, I'm not very familiar with the Indiana research stations, but I feel like I'd assume farmers assume we all these pieces talk all the time. But where do you think we would be if we didn't have localized research stations or, our readers out in the field? Where do you think we'd be today? There's moments where we can like look back of, wow, if we didn't make that decision, where would we be? Do you have any thoughts or words of wisdom there?
Yeah, great question, because I think that's actually a foundation of what we've established, right? That we do develop products locally, right? And you have to take that mentality. So I'm gonna go way back in time, Crystal, maybe like even before you were born, maybe on this part. So I'm just trying to think about like what would be like. Here's one of the things that I think we got wrong as an organization back in the mid 90s. And I was not here at that time, but like I certainly lived it. And there was a hybrid out there in the marketplace that was 3394. And what a dominant product, right? I mean, when you look at 3394 and you think about how much more it yielded than anything else out there, and it was phenomenal. It was like, I was going to say, I don't think we've seen a product like it. We have seen a product. We've seen many products like it, and it's a reflection of where we are. But at that point in time, 3394 probably yielded like 8 bushels more than anything out there. It probably at one point in time, I think it got to like 10% of the total corn market at its high point, to think about it. So Pioneer was the number 1 seed company. 3394 was the number 2 seed company, and everybody else came after that, just for context. But I think the damage in many ways it created is that it created this journey that Pioneer was searching for the next 3394. And that's all they went after, was the next 3394. And what happened with 3394, of course, was gray leaf spot came in and then, it really impacted its yield and performance. And I think we have to recognize that there's different hybrids in the East that are required. And there's this old joke, a breeder joke said, there's an Eastern year, there's a Western year, and there's an Illinois year. We just don't know what's happening in Illinois. I mean, it just swings back and forth, right, to go through. But the point is that I actually think that some of the improvements that we've made for Illinois over the last decade or so is that we've been focused on saying, hey, how do products for Illinois need to work? What do they need to look like? What are the traits, packages, things that they do? And if Illinois needs that product, it's okay that Illinois has it, even though Iowa might not it, even though Nebraska might not need it, and even though Indiana might not. Let's make sure that it's there. And so really, when you look at our pipeline, and I think this would be reflective of a lot of how our North America corn breeding leads or evaluation zone leads think about today. One of the things that we've done is that we've actually created many 3394s in our pipeline. And the reason is that a lot of these things have that 8 to 9 yield bushel advantage to go through. But instead of putting all our sales into one hybrid, we could put those over a better mix. And that is such a better business model to go through because it offers the growers what they need, right? So it's not one solution everywhere. It offers this flexibility about how growers want to manage their farms and their operations. And that's the part that, again, I'm like hugely pleased with in our organization about how we're thinking about the product advancement and deployment.
Well, Crystal, you talked about the Indiana research stations. Windfall, Indiana would be one of those. And Geoff, as you talked briefly about seedsmanship, it actually made me kind of pivot. Part of the reason why we wanted to visit with you was about this idea of history of Pioneer. And you think about some of those key breeders, and I think about just the handful that I was fortunate enough to have interacted with in the early stages of my career at Windfall and other places, and certainly when we talk about Pioneer breeding, we think about, the Raymond Bakers of the world or John Hoffbeck. I was fortunate enough to have interacted with Joe Keyshaw on a pretty regular basis. Those guys all harken back to this seedsmanship piece that you talk about. So I guess, can you talk a little bit about the history and where you see that seedsmanship piece that really fit into the early part of Pioneer as we started to become what we are now?
Yeah. First of all, like, the guys you're talking about, they're the ones that hired me and
Okay.
What a legacy to come in on and people like Joe Keyshaw or Bill Zneeb or Roy Ludke, all of these guys were just like, just foundational to the success that we had. And let me just point out a couple of ways, So like Roy Ludke, he led our northern breeding programs for quite a while. And he and then he led North America after I led North America. But he was actually like the first corn breeder that we had in northern Minnesota. So he and when he moved up there was no corn. Corn was not growing. There was no corn up in that part. And it really is like this part about the knowledge that he brought about corn and what corn could do changed to production practices in northern Minnesota and North Dakota. And that's a little bit about the legacy that some of our brand and our teams have actually had, that you brought corn into these new places that had never seen corn before. And I think, you're going to continue to see that into the future about how corn might look or how corn might work or operate or the production practices that we put it. It's really neat to go through. So coming back to those guys were the foundation that we built our organization on today. And what they did is, and they not only set up a systems foundation for like what you were talking about in terms of how we think about seedsmanship, but they also set up a germplasm foundation that we leverage today. It's the genetics that those guys worked, but they hand it off to the next generation. And when I'm done, I'll hand it off to the next generation to go through to allow this, next century of innovation of corn to come through. And then they also, like, the thing that I learned most about them, and it took a moment in my career actually to figure this out. And what I loved about Pioneer, was that you had folks, and another one inclusive of that was Mike Chapman. And I'm going to tell a story about Mike Chapman. He also was in the North, but then he started leading our winter nurseries operations. But one of the big challenges that we have is that once we have a hybrid, then we need to put the traits into those hybrids, right, to go through. So this could be Vorseed, Power Core. We need to incorporate those traits to make sure that they have the trait package that we want. And so we do a lot of this work in winter nurseries and in Puerto Rico, Hawaii. And when you put things out in the field, bugs eat them, cultivators get them, all this type of thing that, you sometimes knock off the one plant that you really, really needed to create the next cycle of incorporating those traits into our pipeline. And so we're down in Puerto Rico one day, and Mike Chapman, we're driving past this, and there was this old, it was this old factory that used to make jars for ball manufacture. And it was just this big warehouse sitting in the middle of nowhere. And Mike says, hey, we should buy that thing. And then we could retrofit it with lights inside. And then we will baby every single plant that's in there to make sure if it's the one that we want, it's going to survive no matter what to go do. And I was Mike's supervisor at that time, his boss at the time. I said, Mike, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard in my life to go through. What a crazy. Fast forward at 5 years, and that's exactly what we do. And we started just buying these like horticultural buildings in which we're growing corn, or we're growing corn inside these buildings. And you're guaranteed to say, if that is the one seed that you want to turn into a plant based on its genetic profile, you guarantee that that thing is going to grow up and create the next cycle of products to go through. The important part about that story is that there's been like wave after wave of these innovations that generation taught us to think big. Don't be mediocre in your thought. Think big, think bold. And if they're the right ideas, we'll find a way to go and do them. And that's the other part that you want to make sure goes on to the next generations, to say, incremental is really important, but step changes are equally important. And so how to balance that part as an R&D machine is something that we think about all the time.
What are some of those other big steps, Geoff? I mean, I can think of a few in my career, but obviously we know that now that ability to baby that one plant that you need, as you kind of take a step back and as our historian here today, and you look at some of those big steps, what would be a handful that you could think of that maybe folks wouldn't recognize right off, but have been huge step changes, to use your words, as we think back through this last 100 years of Pioneer product development?
Yeah, I'll take one of the first steps. One of the first steps was just saying, how are you going to do predictive breeding or using genetic information to help sort our material? And that journey, I mean, I think like in 2002, Pioneer spent probably close to $25 million on a sequencing study that at that time was ridiculously expensive. You could do the same thing today probably for $100,000 to go through. But that served actually as the foundation for all predictive breeding even till today. And so it taught us what we shouldn't do. It taught us what we should do. And then what that now has allowed us to do is to say, hey, look, I can go faster, quicker than ever before. And then I can do more field testing of those products that I actually think are more likely to be commercialized and make sure I accurately phenotype them well to go through. The second part of this, or the second part of that story, is we created this double haploid system about, like, this is how do we start our breeding programs to go through. And so, it used to be that you made a cross, and then you would generate material from that cross, and you'd slowly purify it over generations. And that purification would probably take 5 years to be quite honestly. This double haploid process allowed you to purify it in 1 year, right away. And you started off with a pure product to go through. So you had your genetic marker prediction system, you had your double haploids, and then the final thing that you had to add to it is, how do we phenotype? How do we characterize better? So we started increasing, first of all, again, I'm just the simple basics of saying, let's get enough planters and combines out there to make sure that we can do the right testing in the right environments to go through. But then it really became this interesting thing about like how many images of plots can we actually go do? So we started taking this phenotyping and taking it really, really serious. And basically when I say phenotyping, I think it's like, how do I drive error out of our breeding system? Like get as much error out, right? Get crap out as quickly, get crap out as quickly as we possibly can out of our breeding program. And so in 2012, we thought, hey, taking images of our different hybrids was going to be important. And at that time, the FAA hadn't really established what drones was going to do. So we had to send, I think it was about 12 of our teammates in North America to go get their sports pilot license just so that they could fly drones. And we could start learning how to use drone imagery to help us with selection. I think last year, and who cares about a couple million, but I think we're going to be a little over 100 million data points from drones to go through to help us make with our hybrid advancement characters. And they're measuring things like height, they're measuring things like stay green, disease resistance, how tassels come out, how ears come out. I mean, the possibilities are kind of endless now to go through on this part. And so you start off with a great germplasm base. You understand the genetics of that germplasm base. You create populations of that germplasm base. You create a great screening tool, phenotyping, to actually be able to select the best material in that place. And then the last part is, how do I commercialize those things? And so this is where impact again fits into that process about now with the impact and working with the agronomy team, the commercial team, about saying, hey, really what's needed? And let's shape this pipeline to what's needed, and let's release those products that we have confidence in. And I think by, like I said before, by 2012, we had quite a bit of confidence in the pipeline, like how the pipeline was running. And then we just needed to let this pipeline come out. And so, loving what you started seeing in like 2016, 17, 18, you start saying, and then just it became kind of routine a little bit, how boring some of that pipeline was, because it looked pretty good a lot of the time.
Geoff, you talk about some of the things that 15 years ago could have felt like science fiction, and even today, like you're talking about sequencing the corn genome and how that informs molecular markers and breeding technology. As I reflect on what Pioneer is bringing to the marketplace today that's different, it is not just that yield separation that we have, the performance gap, but things like stay green. And you say a lot of that's informed by how we phenotypically select for products through drone imaging. You talked about how important it is to have breeding staff actually physically out in the fields and product teams out in fields. I'm just curious, as you zoom out and look another 10 years down the road, where do you imagine that the world of breeding is going? Not necessarily at Pioneer. I don't want to give away the secret sauce that we have, but as you just think about, the advent of artificial intelligence, even more computing power that we have to help with these predictive breeding efforts, the characterization that we've been able to do on these pedigrees that go back to 3394 or to 3780 or to Copper Cross. How does a business like Pioneer that has all of that knowledge really take it and continue to drive genetic gain?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so let me ground the organization on a very simple philosophy first, and then I'm going to answer your question. So there's a little anecdote, but my dad, he was a soil scientist up at the University of Minnesota, and he had 3 children, and all of us ended up getting a degree in plant genetics, and he was really disappointed in all of us, right? He was like, "What don't you understand? It's below ground that works." He said, but let me tell you let me give you a piece of advice to all 3 of you. And he said, you can never trust a pale plant breeder. And what he meant by that was a plant breeder who doesn't go to the field doesn't really know what the problem is that he has out there. And so part of the commitment of our structure and our design is that we're always going to be locally based and have breeders out in the field to make local selections to go do that. Because I think it's out in the field that you actually understand the problem. It's not in a lab. It's not on a computer to go through. But then you do have to use new technologies to go do that. And I think this is the really fun part to think about what's next. And so there's so many different ways that we're talking about how do I increase the scale of the plant breeding, the size of our funnel. And I think there's two of them that will be meaningful. And as a matter of fact, this morning, we were just meeting with the team for the next 3 days about what does the shape of our breeding program look like 10 years from now to go through. And so a lot of it is, we talked about the size of the breeding funnel at the beginning. My goal, and I think we're pretty close to the technologies that are there, in the next 2 or 3 years, and maybe I'll say it that way best, we'll find out if we can actually take the top of the funnel and double it or quadruple it or quintuple it. Right. And all that means, again, the only thing that means is that there's more possibilities out there for something better when you make it bigger. Right. So if you have the same distribution, if I make the distribution bigger, there's something out on the extreme side that I'm going to identify. So you have to make sure that your phenotyping, all of that machinery is still in place, all the product delivery, you still need to do it. But I do hope, I do hope that this tool that we talk about, gene editing, comes into play and to the fruition that it gets to meet its potential. And here's what I mean by that. I think with biotech, right? So biotech has changed our industry in many ways, right? It fundamentally changed what we could do in terms of our product development. But today and age, biotech is a very expensive thing to go through. So you have to be very, very certain that those are the things that you want to focus on to make sure you bring those to market. And we'll make those investments into new herbicide traits, new insect resistance traits. We'll continue to make that investment. But I think gene editing has this application that says, it doesn't matter. I can use that tool in almost any direction that I think is really valuable for us to go do. And it becomes a way in which the breeders, who again are the people who should know the problem, what do they need? Do I need better stalks? Do I need better roots? Do I need better, whatever it might be? How do I put into a system that I can, almost on demand, create the genetic variability that I need in my tools in the future? And I think we're on this journey right now of figuring out how to do that, how to marry the technology, how to marry the need, the problem, and then the implementation on a systematic way to create that as a way we'll make products in the 2030s. And I've commented about my age here. I'm like, man, I wish I was starting off, because it would be such a fun thing to be able to just be part of that, to really think about how to use that tool and the next generation of product development. So, and I don't think you can do any of that without some of the high intensity analytics to go into place, right? And so I don't know if this is, I'm not sure it's exactly relevant, but when you think about the computing power that we've put in just to run last year and create some of the modeling systems that we put into place, we ran almost 400 million analyses to just run our breeding programs on a global basis. And you just think about that computational part, the way it's designed, that if I collect a new piece of data out in the field, I want the breeders to see it the next morning. So that you're always going out and saying, hey, look, I got more data, make a better decision. I got more data, make a better decision. And I think it always comes down to this, that we should get measured on our decisions, and our decisions about how we advance products that are going to yield more, tolerate storms more, better agronomics, all those types of things. That should be what we actually measure as we go through as an organization. And then how do you share with that with the growers, and this is the product turnover part about doing that systematically.
Geoff, I find it really interesting, your comment about the data the following morning. In my conversations with the breeders, both in corn and soybeans at the windfall research plants, especially if you happen to be lucky enough to catch one of them during the fall harvest, that's a very real thing for them. You'll ask them a question, they'll say, well, I need to look at the data. And we have specialists at these locations that are doing that analysis and then moving that data to the breeders. And they really are, in a very real way, making real-time decisions on those products. And I find that fascinating because I think a lot of folks are, many of our customers as well, think that that's a wait and see type of decision. And while it's important and the breeders out in the countryside, they have got real-time data in front of them, almost like box scores, if you will, that's helping them make predictions and move forward, move the ball forward, if you want to carry the sports analogy further. It really is fascinating to see the things that you're talking about in action when we have those conversations with folks that are out here helping us develop products.
Yeah. We often use the refrain, hunt where the ducks are. And, when data says the ducks ain't there, move on, man, and move on quickly, because that's a dollar wasted when we linger too long on something that's not a commercial product. Just kick it out, get it out of the system, and move on to the next. I mean, I think it's really this part about just continual improvement, whether it's a hybrid, whether it's the technology, whatever it might be, how do we just move forward? So make decisions quickly, move forward. It's just like, compounding interest in your savings account or something
Sure.
like that, right? Just keep going, compound that interest.
I want to go back to your funnel, talking about quadrupling it or making it larger at the top end. Can you walk us through, because one of the things that everybody, I'm sure, on the podcast has seen us as agronomists use that funnel, or one of our counterparts describe that. But one of the things we've always talked about is trying to make the top much wider and maybe the funnel a bit shallower. Can you talk a little bit about that, this idea? We've traditionally talked about 5 to 7 years. Can you talk about, I guess, how we do that, make the top of the funnel larger, but try to shallow the funnel up to be able to cycle through these products, your systematic approach to product movement on? Can you talk a little bit about how we try to, or are trying to, shallow that funnel up a bit?
Yeah. So let me take one. The first comment will be about the expansion or widening of that funnel and why I think it's doable. And then 2, we'll make it shorter. And then 3, I'll talk a little bit about the delivery of products, because 1, you can drive genetic gain, but then you have to deliver the products. And so how do you balance those two things to go through with systematic and make sure that we're reliable producers of products too? So, when before I mentioned the double haploid system that we have, and in corn, you make double haploids off the embryo of a seed. Right. So you take the embryo of a seed and you create double haploids. And so in other crops like canola or wheat, we make double haploids off the pollen grains, the microspores, or the things that will become pollen grains to go through. And so you just think about like that context for a moment, saying, how many embryos are on an ear of corn? Maybe 250, this is on an embryo basis, right? 250, 200, 250. How many pollen grains on that plant?
Orders of
Several million.
Yeah, it's just a couple of ordinary, right? So this is like the technology that you say, hey, look, can we drive this? And so there's big efforts about saying, how do we create, double haploids from microspores in corn? And how do we actually push that forward? And what are the technical milestones that we need to go do to be part of this, just double haploid production process to go through? So, if I'm like 10% as efficient, right, with the tassel versus the ear, I'm like, again, orders of magnitude better off. So like, how do we drive this? And so this is one of the core aspects of the technology. And then I would add that we're thinking about how to incorporate gene editing right into that process system. And this will be, what happens in the 2030s, I think, is that will hopefully become routine in the 2030s to go through. So then the predictive breeding that we used to do. Look, when I started off, you would take your line, you would cross it 1 year, you would evaluate it again the next year, you would evaluate again the next year, and then you would kind of say, okay, let's marry it up and see how it's doing against everyone else's codes. You would do it 2 more years about that time, and then you would put it into what the 2 years prior to commercialization to go through. Right now, because of our predictive capabilities, we actually just throw things away just purely based on their genotype. And in fact, we have skipped an entire step of that whole process at the first 3 years. We've skipped an entire step there and just advanced products straight to what we call, I won't get into the nomenclature, but we just skip right into advanced testing to go through when we think the genetics of that inbred is worthwhile. And what we're showing is remarkable success with that process of just saying, hey, look, just based on the genetics. And the genetics, one way to think about the genetics is to say, if I know it's going to snap, brittle snap, let's throw it away. If I know it's going to root launch, let's throw it away. If I know it's going to have too much gray or northern, let's throw it away. So just get rid of the crap again really, really quickly. And the things that get advanced to more advanced generations, then we phenotype the heck out of it. We characterize it like crazy to make sure that what we don't know about, we're actually taking the field data to go do. And so then we become much more confident about the inbreds that are advancing in our pipeline. And once you have confidence in the inbreds, you start making up hybrids within those inbreds to go through. And so you can evaluate a lot more combination of good inbred, good hybrids made from good inbreds. So you have this pile to go through, and then that's what we just need to sort out. And, that's how our commercialization pathway. So the important part about that is that if you actually look, and I'm going to get my numbers wrong, I should go back and know this, but what we used to do, I'll say it this way. If you measure from when I make an inbred to when I use that inbred as a parent, we've probably taken out 1.5 years of that cycle time to go through of that process. And that really is the process of genetic gain. Every time I do that cycle, I get increased genetic gain. So if I shorten the cycle, I'm doing that faster per time, right? To go through, so going faster. Then the bottom part is really about delivering that genetic gain. I need to put on the traits. I need to make sure it's producible. I need to make sure we've gone through impact. So we do a wide area testing across years. Because if there's one thing I've learned is that I never know the year effect, right? The year effect just throws you for a loop. I mean, it's like you can think you're as smart as you are, and then you come out the next year and you're saying, "Oh crap, that one got me," right? And so even you look at this year, right? There in your markets, I'm sure there was some churn about tassel wrap to go through. There was genetics at tassel wrap that we had never seen anything like that before to go through, and you're totally shocked that it happened. You realize what a strange environment, what a strange growing year, how much moisture we had early, how hot it got once we had all that moisture, and how quickly corn was growing. So really, that makes sense. But we really didn't think about it too much, right? So these are the real values of making sure that we're evaluating our material over a period of years to bring it to market and make sure that we're okay when we get out there. And I again, largely I'll think the surprises that we have today compared to the surprises that we might have had 10 years ago are a night and day difference in terms of what we see.
And thank goodness we have all the local research stations and impact locations to evaluate products, especially in those year-to-year effect season, right?
That's right.
Gosh.
That's right. That's the value of testing across years and environments. There's no substitute for that. You need to make sure that you're confident in that product when you release it, and that's really the goal of those products. And when you really think about how our system is set up today, those 3 years prior to where we actually put out anything for a demand plan, it's a lot of data that we collect on those products before we ever commercialize it, and it's about as good as you can get, I think.
Well, having been through the bad times and early in my career and where we sit today, Geoff, all of the things that you have shared, it just continues to give me confidence in where we're headed as an organization, and the fact that we've got big thinkers like yourself and others in the organization who are really looking for those next big steps. That's incredibly exciting to me, both as an employee, but also as a fan of the brand and as an agriculturalist, if you will, that we are making some very serious strides. I'll ask you, I think we've talked about this, but as you sit here and you look at things, what are you most excited about not only in your role, but for Pioneer as we move into the next decade or so, as we kind of finish up for the day with you?
I want to put you guys under pressure now, right? So one of the things that I like is that the banter back between the R&D and the commercial groups. I love competition. I love the pressure on us. So I was looking back at and I was working. I said this to Jeremy Dirks, right? So this was to Dirks. And so I was looking at the performance advantage back when Pioneer had its market share leadership back in the day, right? So, and I pointed out that today's yield advantage is greater than when those products had the 45% market share. And so my question to him was, Jeremy, what's preventing you from hitting 45% market share? Where are we at, bud? I mean, we're giving you the products to go do it. And it's a little bit like when we think about that, like, how can that be true? That's a ridiculous statement. But this is where we're kind of becoming, right? And thinking about how we should behave as leaders in the ag industry and what we want to shape that ag industry to be and have the confidence of the products behind us to go through. And so to my commercial team, for the commercial team that's out there, everything we do is about maintaining that level of quality and performance as we go out there for that part. And I would push all of us to think about what then is our responsibility in terms of agriculture industry, how we should talk about things, how we should position things, how we should develop things. And there's this part like of I wish I had the quote in front of me, but that I'll go back to a very old Pioneer statement, which was the long look, and the documents and the statements in the long look. And I actually think that that's a wonderful document that we should all go back and read about saying, hey, look, we're going to have very good products. We need to represent those very good products with our customers fairly and honestly. But we are going to be an outstanding business, right? Because we have outstanding products and we treat our customers fairly, openly, and honestly to go through. And if you put those three things together, I think that's why you're a 100-year-old business. And then think about saying, I'm going to continue to do that, because I'll tell you one of the things that I feel proudest about. And if you go back in any one of our careers and you can just do that milestone, think about how much agricultural productivity has gone up in our generation, in our time frame, and that we are responsible for continuing that journey to go through, right? I mean, I think we as a company, that is part of our responsibility to be part of that. And I think that is such a cool thing. I mean, if that doesn't get you as to a purpose about why you come to work, I don't know what does, right? And I think that's what's exactly going to happen. I think we have the foundation to lead in agriculture for many, many, many years to come. And all we have to do is to do our job well. But that's not too hard to ask. Just do our job well.
Just do our job well. I have an example, Geoff, for your talking about yield gains over years. So we just reviewed the 2025 growing season with Northern Illinois Pioneer reps, and our plot sets for corn, which had products in it that were more for variable type acre, not racehorsey, but very stable products up through, some of our highest yielding hybrids. And I noticed there was a 40 bushel swing on those. And I was like, I don't know if I've ever seen that as you compare about plots across the northern half quarter of the state or whatever. And so I was like, I wonder what 5 years ago, what this chart looked like. So I pulled up 2020s. The highest yielding variety in 2020 was still lower yielding than our lowest yielding hybrid in 2025. So that was crazy to see, just obviously there's year-to-year effects too, but what phenomenal yield gains. And I do feel like our farmers are experiencing that. I do have kind of an off-the-wall question for you, Geoff. So as I think about it from a research standpoint, you guys are truly creating like the meat and potatoes of what we get to work with for Pioneer. But you've seen, marketing, it's their job to advertise that and create some creative spins on things. Do you have a favorite marketing like pitch, or like I think of different classes like the Y series or muscle pod beans back in the day or different things? You probably know way more than what I do. So did you have a favorite one that you thought was pretty creative.
Oh, look, I mean, I'll tell you one, like my most recent favorite one, and only because it involved beer, was when the Z series. Did you guys get any of the Z series cans of beer?
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
I
You
like
sure-
that.
You bet.
Right? I mean, I was like, all right, this is good stuff. And I love the creativity that went on the can, right? So where it had like record yields and things like that. I am constantly amazed how creative our marketing team is, to be quite honest. I mean, it's like as you mentioned, Brian, on you have creative people, but we have creative people across the organization, and helping people like connect the dots is such an important part about the right messaging to go through. It really is. It really is amazing to go through. And I just, I salute the marketing team with the creativity they come up with. But, we're just probably because it's most recent, I like the beer. Actually, it was good beer. I didn't mind it. So.
Well,
There's
Jeff,
big
we'll
thank
point.
you. Someone
oh,
say
go-
that. Sorry. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, we'll point you to a podcast that we did a few years ago with the guys from Back Pocket who brew that we got the skinny on how they came up with it and how they worked with the marketing department and everything. So if you're a fan of the beer, maybe check that podcast out and you can get a little behind the scenes on how they came up with all that too. So
It'd be great.
yeah. Well, Jeff, thank you very much for the time. We appreciate this. This is a great way for us to start our 100th anniversary kickoff, and do appreciate your time today. And just thank you very much, not only for today, but also what you've done for the organization, what you're doing for us out here in the field. So thank you very much for taking the time to visit with us today.
Well, thanks for the chance to come talk about something clearly that I love. So
Most definitely. We definitely saw that. So thank you very much.
thank you. Take care.
This has been another episode of Outstanding in Your Field. Like and follow our podcast wherever you are listening. We've got a new episode at least once a month. You can also find us on YouTube by following Pioneer Seeds. You can find me on Instagram at B_K_Schrader.
I'm Crystal Williams. You can contact me at crystal.williams@pioneer.com.
And I'm Carl Joern. You can follow along with me at CJoern on X or on Facebook at CJoern Agronomy. That's CJOERN.
That concludes this Pioneer Agronomy video podcast. Visit our page on pioneer.com and follow us on Twitter and Facebook for more agronomy insights.